Today we're going to take a look at getting totals from a SharePoint list. In particular, we're going to look at a really efficient and fast way to do that in Power Automate. Specifically, we'll be looking at the XPath function, which is a special function you can invoke in Power Automate to get totals, especially when working with array data. If you're like me, you often will run into situations where you need to get totals on data from SharePoint lists. And of particular concern are lists that may have thousands of records. And so efficiency is going to be really important. So we're going to take a look at the approach that you can use, and hopefully this is something you can apply on all kinds of different situations whenever you need to do reporting and calculate totals on SharePoint list related data. So with that, let's get SharePoint Smart. Okay, I'm here in SharePoint. I've got a list that I'm looking at, and for our example today, I've got a dummy help ticket system, and this is for creating help tickets and keeping up with them in terms of current status, and especially reporting. That's what we're thinking about today. So to begin with, what we're going to do is just take a look at what this data is first, and that way some of the other steps will make more sense. So here is my help tickets list, and you can see I've got the option set up in the view where I've got some summary totals at the bottom. So currently I have 61 tickets, and then I have a summary total for a cost column that I also have in this report. That might be tied to hardware equipment that's got to be replaced. Mainly I just put that in there to illustrate what we're going to be doing with our summary totals later on. So just to further illustrate, I'll create a dummy help ticket. I'm going to say, what am I going to say? My speakers need to be replaced. And then I'm going to put in my name. And then I can pick a category. I've got some fancy formatting going on. That's through column formatting. That's something I'll talk more about as we get towards the end of this presentation. Status reported, that's fine. Request date of today, that's fine. I'll go ahead and put a cost in here just for the illustration of the data. All right, so you can see my counts changed. I've got 62 help tickets. So this is just dummy data that I'm going to use for the illustration, what we're going through today. So the scenario is this. I have this list of tickets and I need to get summary data on this. I want to know things related to the total cost, total number of tickets that are in a particular category or in a particular status, and I need a snapshot of this on a regular basis. So I might want to do a timed workflow. In other words, it's not enough for me to just see the current state. I need to be able to do some reporting and see how this is going over time in terms of closing out tickets, response time, and things like that. Therefore, I need a second list to capture that summary data. So let me go back to my help tickets hub that I set up, and I made a second list which is called help ticket summary. And the purpose of this list is to capture those roll-up totals at a specific point in time. So as I mentioned, it may be useful for me to set up a scheduled workflow in Power Automate to get these totals for this on a weekly basis. And from that, I can begin to get some reporting which can show a trend in terms of how things are going on a historical basis. You know, current status versus where I was last month or 2 months ago, that type of thing. So I'm going to have a single list record here with summary data, and that's going to be automatically created for me. So now we're going to get to Power Automate. And the focus of this presentation is to talk about the most efficient way to get these summary totals. Now, I'm going to begin by talking to you a little bit about the way that you might typically approach these things in Power Automate, and then we'll talk about using this XPath function to get more efficient processing. So let's go ahead and switch over to Power Automate. And what I'm going to do is just go to this flow. I made a flow called XPath flow. I have this set up for manual trigger, but in reporting scenarios, especially like I'm illustrating, what you'll want to do is set this on a schedule, and you can find plenty of resources to help you with that. As I mentioned, I may want this to run every night or once a week, that type of thing. So I'm going to get into the flow. Of course, at the beginning of the flow, I need to get all of the list records from my help tickets list, one of the most basic things you can do in a flow. When you do this, you do need to make sure that you go to the settings, and you're going to want to adjust it so that it doesn't return the default limit, which is 100 records. So make sure to go into the settings, turn on pagination, and then set that to 5,000. That's the SharePoint list view threshold. And then you can come out of that screen, and that way you know you're not going to have any problems there. One trick I'll show you, this definitely isn't required, but as a frequent Power Automate user, I don't like the warning message I get when I do a get items query in a list like this. It shows you a little warning basically telling you that it wants you to use a filter query to limit the records return. In this scenario, I need to return all of the records. I don't know of another way to turn that off. If there is a way, please let me know in the comments below the video. But a trick you can use, which I picked up on a page in a search earlier today, you could just simply say modified LE, meaning less than or equal to this variable UTC now in single quotes. That's just a little trick that will get rid of this pop-up warning box that wants to appear if you don't use the filter query. You could use any kind of condition. Basically, this is an erroneous condition, which is going to return all records anyway, but it's just a trick to make that warning box not pop up, which I don't like to see over and over again. Okay, so before I get into this XPath function, let's talk about what you normally might do to get this data back to SharePoint. I could certainly do things like use a filter query to return only specific records back, and then I can use a loop to go through the records. I can use a for each loop. I could put variables in my flow, and I could get totals using that. And from a building perspective, that all makes sense. It's fairly intuitive. It absolutely will work. Unfortunately, especially in comparison to this, and in the case where you have hundreds or thousands of records, you are going to take a significant performance hit. In other words, it is going to be slow in processing to the point it's detrimental to some things that you may want to accomplish. So although those methods can work, those are not nearly as efficient as what we're going to go through in the video right now. So, XPath, that's the topic that we're going to be coming up on. We want to use this function. As you're getting ready to see, it's extremely efficient at performing the operations that we need to execute on this data. I will post a link under the video. I recommend that you do a little bit of reading on this if this is unfamiliar to you, just to get some high-level understanding of what that is. There's plenty of information on the web. I have always loved the W3 School site, and they have a nice 5 or 6 page section all about XPath to take you through a basic tutorial to give you that good high-level understanding. So I recommend that you read through that if this is the first time you're using or hearing about XPath. I know for my part, this isn't something that I normally would be dealing with, and so that was for sure beneficial to me. All right, so you know that we want to use XPath. So now the question is, okay, well then how do we take advantage of that? And there's some steps that we need to go through in order to tap into that functionality. So first thing we need to do is a data operation called select. And I'm going to show you how to set that up. And what this is doing is pulling back values from this get items workflow block, and it's just going to put them in a specific set. For the data that I'm trying to pull back, there are particular things I'm interested in. I want to get a total on the cost. So that's the field right here. And then I also want to be looking at the category selection and the status selection. So in order to put in this operator, you just need to do data operations category, and then it's good to see these different options. This particular one's called select. And when you go in there, there's a tiny little button. It says switch map to text mode, and that is what you want to use in this case. Okay? So what you want to do is use the value of the return of the list items in the preceding block, and then you're mapping the data. So I've already done it here. I'm just repeating this step to illustrate for you. So if I was going to get the cost, I can just type this in, and there's cost. That's the only thing you need to do for these selects. In my case, I have 3 of them. In your case, you would do this for each of the individual fields from the SharePoint list, where you either need to get a sum total, or you need to count how many, based on a choice selection. So in my case, I have 3 of them. Let me go ahead and get rid of this because I don't want to break my pre-existing workflow. So that's the select operation. I've got 3. That's kind of part 1, if you will. The next thing is I need to compose this data. I need to basically sandwich it all together in this JSON formatting. That is JavaScript object notation. Okay, so in order to do that, you do need to follow specific syntax. I'll either provide a link or post the syntax under the video. But this is JSON formatting using a particular format. So in order to do this part, I just labeled it JSON. I do recommend you put appropriate labels on the top of these just to stay organized and keep track of what you're doing. So this particular step is a compose operation. So I do compose, and then I can just select that block. And you simply need to just type in the data as was shown here. So all I did literally was just type that in. So I have curly braces here, and then I can just keep putting stuff in. Don't worry about the indents. It'll kind of take care of that on its own. I can just go ahead and type all this stuff in here. Once again, I'll post some code for you which you can mimic. So I need this root node. And then in my case, I had 3 columns that I was going for, so I needed the output of those 3 columns. So the options for those outputs are going to show on the sidebar. So just mimic this format, and you're just going to insert that information dynamically. So I'll do it once more just to show you what that looks like. But basically, I can come over to the dynamic area, and then I can find the output. So the first one was from cost, so I'm looking for select cost, and I just click on it. It will insert it for me. All right, and then I can do things like peek code that kind of gives me a preview of what it's actually pulling in there. That's kind of handy as well. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this. And like I say, I recommend that you rename this to JSON because that's what we're doing here. We're formatting this data, getting it into a special format, which is preparing it for our next step. Okay, so let me delete that. It's angry because I named it the same thing as the other one. Let me get rid of this. Okay, now we're able to get to the really cool part, which is this XPath function. The rest of the way we're going to be doing a compose operation, and we're going to be using a special syntax for this. The good thing is you can copy and paste this and reuse it over and over again. So once you have one of these set up, you can just keep on doing it, rinse and repeat, just like that. So let's take a look at the syntax for that. So I've typed that in this expression builder. This is a compose action, just like the preceding one. And we're going to break this down in Notepad and take a look and see what that looks like. All right, let me zoom this in a little bit so you guys can see okay. Okay, there's the XPath function. In order to use the XPath function, it is expecting XML. It is designed all around that. As you learn more about it, you'll understand that that's what XPath is working with. So I need to wrap some functions here. So inside of that, I have this XML function to go ahead and get my JSON output that I made in the preceding step. So this outputs JSON. That is because I named that compose action JSON. Make sure you do the same thing, otherwise your outputs would have a different name. And then in here you have to provide an argument, and this is special syntax that you use, which is part of XPath. Now in this case, I'm just looking for the count of the overall records, and I use the cost node. It doesn't matter which node I'd use. All of them have the same amount of value. So that was my first step. Now, what you want to understand is when this flow is executing, the data that's returned by this block is a comma delimited list of values. So you're literally going to have a comma delimited string of every cost from the list. So if I had 5 records in the list, each with cost values, the value in this is simply going to say something like 500, 320, 400, 30, 20. That is all that'll show up. It's a comma delimited string of values. That's the same case for these 3 different fields that I was getting data from. So that's what the XPath function is analyzing. So that one was counting the total quantity of records. The next one, I wanted to get a summary total of the cost. So it's a very similar set of code. Let's look at that next. And it's just like this. So these are XPath functions. There's a sum function in XPath, and I just told it to tell me the sum total from this cost column, and that's going to total that up for me. All right, and now we get into these choice fields in SharePoint. So what I want to know is how many tickets in total did I have for each of the statuses. So there's a lot of repeats here. You kind of copy and paste and repeat for each of these because I need a data point to capture and bring back to my summary list for each one of these. That's so I can get this information that says we have 27 reported tickets, 9 on hold tickets, 16 in progress, so on. So I needed that for status, and I also was counting up categories. So there's a lot of things I'm totaling for this particular list. Okay, so let's look at the syntax for this third one. I'm going to copy and paste that out so we can look at it more easily. Bring that over. Now, this one has a little bit of extra syntax in it. So what we're saying is I'm interested in the statuses node, and this is a comma delimited list of the statuses from that full list. So if you can picture, you're literally going to have it saying things like in progress, comma, reported, comma, on hold, etc. through the entire list of records. I have 62 records. So that's the data that it's working on. So I need to tell it to look at the statuses node, and then we have some special characters in here. The square brackets is something I'm putting in here to tell it to filter those records so that I only return specific results. The dot is a special character, which means this node. So what I'm saying here is I want to get the count of all of the status records, specifically in the case where the record equals reported. Now in XPath, normally that would be a single quote like this, but that will break your expression in Power Automate because you need to escape that character. We already have a single quote being used in the expression. So luckily it's really easy to escape that character. You just put an additional single quote. Don't worry, you're not going to have to think about or remember these things very often, especially once you've done this the first time, because it's copy and paste. You're going to simply have this code handy, and you're going to repeat the same pattern in all kinds of different workflows, and that makes it easy. You're just reapplying that same pattern over and over again. So this will get me the total number in that list that's reported. Okay? So at this point, it's really the same pattern down through this whole workflow. This next one, it's identical. The only difference is I changed where it said reported to on hold. And then it's just rinse and repeat. I make a compose operation for every single field that I want to look at. And make sure that you give a good description at the top of each of those compose operations so that it's nicely organized and very easy to reference. So those are all the status ones. And then the category one, of course, I changed the field reference there because now I'm looking at the categories node. So we'll take a look at that syntax for that one. So I say, give me the categories node, and I just want the ones in this case where it equals email. And so I just keep reapplying that same pattern over and over again. And obviously you want to do testing. In my list, I wanted to look at, I can look at those totals, I can do filters, and it's always a good idea to verify your results. So I could do something like check. I want to know how many are in other. I could do filter by, say other, apply. Okay, so I can do a check and it says there's 9. So I can basically verify, make sure when I get my results, I should see 9 for other. So when we go back to our other part, we can confirm that that's the case. And that way, it just gives us that validation to make sure we didn't do anything wrong. Okay, so there we go. Other is 9. So that's the kind of thing I want to check. Okay, so it's just rinse and repeat all the way down, and now at the very end we have all of our data ready to go, and we're simply going to create a SharePoint list record. So I made a special list for this called Help Ticket Summary, which we were just looking at. I put in a title for it. I did a special formatting to give me the date time at the top. You can use this if you like. Let me show that to you real quick. It just converts from the UTC time zone over to my local time zone, and then just gives that date information to me in a nice format. And then this part is extremely easy. You just click into each of the fields and you just move over the data. So there's for reported, I just come over here and I just scan through. Well, it doesn't want to find it that way, but I can look through that's where those descriptions come in. So I'm going to say, I'm looking for the one that says reported. Since I've got a lot of them, I have to scroll through my list. Summary status reported. So because I've done a good job doing descriptions at the top, it makes this step much, much easier for me. I'm not confused about which one to pick. So I took all of those compose actions and I'm just mapping them right into these fields I made into my SharePoint list. And that's it. At the end, it just creates a single record for me in that SharePoint list. Okay, now here is the most amazing part to me. Look at the execution performance for this. Now, granted, this is 62 records, but I can assure you this can be as much as 100 times faster than attempting to do this through some type of looping operation or other methods. It is incredibly efficient. To my knowledge, this is the fastest possible approach you can use to aggregate data from your SharePoint list. So it is worth learning this XPath approach, this XPath function, because it's going to help you to be so much more efficient when doing these type of activities. Let's go ahead and run it, and we'll see how long it takes. It's running. Oh, it took 2 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to go back over to my list. We'll take a look. There it is. So I just ran it. This is my newest record on top, and it tells me the totals on each of these. As I said, what you want to do is put this on a schedule. Now, in the case of this list, I have such a small number of records, I wouldn't be punished for being inefficient with my workflow. Where it makes a big difference is when you have hundreds and thousands of records, then this really profoundly impacts the efficiency of what you're doing. So I again encourage you to review the pages on the W3 Schools page to give you an introduction to XPath. Of course, there's much more information you can learn about it, but the patterns I showed you in this tutorial today should really tell you what you need to do. Now, one question you might ask is, okay, well that's useful, but what if I want to do a chart and make it look nice? And in fact, that's really, in particular, a reason to want to do this type of operation. It's to do summary reporting and charting. I have set up a couple charts in this data, and I have those in some other views, so we'll take a look at that real quick. So here's a category 1. That's a bar chart. What's cool here is you'll notice I have a bar chart for each of those records, so it'll just keep going and scrolling. And then I have one for status as well. This is immediate, so every time I create one of those records, I have that. It's really very handy. I do want to mention you can tap into charting templates at my website at SharePointDashboards.com. If you're not familiar with that, you can go there and you can get a free sign up, which includes 20 free templates. As far as the charting templates, there are 22 charting options. The ones that you see there are on this one that says chart columns 1 row. And there's lots of different things in there. Obviously, you can do just about any kind of charting you want. You could do a pie chart or whatever kind of things you want to do. So I do hope that you will browse through that at the SharePointDashboards.com website. And that's it. I hope you found that useful. I don't know exactly who to attribute some of this information about. I've seen various SharePoint pages of people describing using XPath, and I stumbled upon it after having some problems because my workflow to get these totals was taking way too long. And I was shocked how much faster this operated. I almost really thought my workflow was broken because I didn't see how it could possibly be going so fast, but it really is that big of an improvement. Okay. So I hope you found this interesting. This is something I'm really excited about because I have to do this type of workflow a lot. I'm often in a situation with customers where I need to run those recurring workflows to get summary data from SharePoint lists. And I definitely run into problems, some cases where that can take hours to perform. And that's a problem, especially in the case where I need to use other workflows and I really have to be efficient. So this is something you want to reach to. You want to have it in your toolbox, you want to be comfortable with it, and you want to use this over and over again. Anytime you need to total up your SharePoint list data and do something with it, make records like we saw in this case, you should definitely be trying to use this approach. I hope you found that useful. I hope it can help you be more efficient with SharePoint and with Power Automate, and good luck.